I'm John McKee, editor of Messianic Apologetics, messianicapologetics.net. And I would like to welcome you to this episode of Messianic Insider, your theology and news roundup for November the 20th, 2025. As announced yesterday, for our theology roundup, we will be discussing the Fourth Commandment from Exodus, and then tomorrow, Friday, we'll be discussing the Fourth Commandment from Deuteronomy. Of course, we've got Shabbat coming up this weekend, and looking for just a really good topic. I thought this would be something we would be able to benefit from. Now, recently, our ministry released our updated Messianic Sabbath Helper publication. This was originally released in 2015. It is massive, just like the Kosher Helper. Includes a wide breadth of material addressing a wide array of topics associated with Shabbat. This publication has been divided up into two main parts: the significance of Shabbat and a theology of Shabbat. And a huge part of this resource is examining the 50 or so Bible passages, that's a ballpark number, which deal with the issue of the seventh-day Sabbath, whether it's in the Tanakh or whether it's in the apostolic writings. And so today we're going to discuss the Fourth Commandment. All right, let me switch windows really quickly, and we'll get into this. So yes, this is the analysis of Exodus 20, verses 8 through 11 from the Messianic Sabbath Helper. Exodus 20, verses 8 through 11. Remember the Sabbath day, Yom Shabbat, Tree of Life version, to keep it holy. You shall labor 6 days and do all your work. But the seventh day is a Sabbath, Shabbat, to Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh, your God. You shall not do any work in it, you, nor your son, nor your daughter, your male servant, nor your female servant, nor your livestock, nor your sojourner who is within your gates. Mark 2:27, Matthew 12:2, Luke 13:14, 23:56. For in 6 periods Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh made heaven and earth, the sea and all that is in them, and rested on the 7th period. Therefore, Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh blessed the Sabbath day, Yom Shabbat, Tree of Life version, and made it holy. Acts 14:15, Revelation 10:6, 14:17. And this is from the Messianic Apologetics Revised version, which is adapted from the public domain World Messianic Bible. So it is an author's rendering. The Fourth Commandment, which enjoins Sabbath observance upon the broad community of Israel, is often regarded among the 2 positive commandments, along with the 5th commandment enjoining honor for father and mother, Exodus 20, verse 12, Deuteronomy 5:16, insomuch that the 4th commandment is not intended to be prohibitive, but instead be something positive for the people of God. There are differences between the Exodus 20, 8 through 11 delivery of the 4th commandment, beginning with remember, and Deuteronomy 5, 12 through 15, beginning with observe. Exodus 20, verses 8 through 11, roots the institution of the Sabbath within creation. Also Genesis 2, 1 through 3, whereas Deuteronomy 5, 12 through 15, roots it within Israel's deliverance via the Exodus. Conservative readers of the Torah, adhering to Mosaic authorship and/or oversight, would argue that any differences between these passages are only slight, perhaps with the latter emphasizing a scene of ancient Israel getting ready to enter into the Promised Land. In contrast, the critical tradition would note Exodus 20, verses 8 through 11, including a combination of the so-called P source or priestly writer, along with the so-called D source or Deuteronomist at work, perhaps with D being older. More broadly, for sure, is how even those who adhere to the JEDP documentary hypothesis still have to treat Exodus 20, verses 8 through 11 in its final form, with the fourth commandment placed among the 10 commandments. Jeffrey H. Tegay remarks in the Jewish Study Bible how, quote, "This is the longest commandment in the Decalogue, indicating the Sabbath's importance as one of the quintessential expressions of loyalty to God," unquote. John I. Durham also asserts, quote, "The fourth commandment is the longest in the Decalogue because it is the most expanded of all the commandments. No other commandment has received as much reapplication and as many defining and justifying clauses as this one," unquote. As readers of Exodus 20, verses 8 through 11 discover, it is not only the rest which God enjoins upon his people generally which should strike us, but the all-encompassing categories of those who otherwise might be excluded from rest which are included. This not only communicates an important message about the character of God in relation to the human beings he has created, but also how all, and not just some, need rest and refreshment, and how no perceived group of superior people are to rest at the expense of others' labor. Exodus 20, verse 8. The fourth commandment opens with the direction, "Remember the Sabbath day to sanctify it." Exodus 20, verse 8, Art Scroll Tanakh, or "Remember the Sabbath day to hallow it." Alter's version, "Zakor et Yom HaShabbat le Kadsho." Here, the verb zakar, appearing in the call stem, simple action, active voice, would mainly involve to remember, to call to mind, technically expression in legislation, from the Kaler-Baumgartner lexicon. The Keter Crown Bible actually renders it as commemorate. Certainly, while there may be some variation of opinion between those who see remember in Exodus 20, verse 8, and observe in Deuteronomy 5:12, the issue of remembering the Sabbath here does involve those who observe it, recalling the Sabbath's origins in the rest or cessation from work which God undertook in Genesis 2, 1 through 3. The message of recall the Sabbath day would be to direct not just the Israelites to the need to remember to keep it, but also to be conscious of its origins. Nahum Amsarna does appropriately direct, quote, "The Sabbath is wholly an Israelite innovation. There is nothing analogous to it in the entire ancient Near Eastern world. The Sabbath is completely disassociated from the movement of celestial bodies. This singularity, together with creation as the basis for the institution, expresses the quintessential idea of Israel's monotheism. God is entirely outside of and sovereign over nature," unquote. Durham addresses the relationship of the Hebrew noun Shabbat to the verb shavat, which in Exodus 20, verses 8 through 11, has an unambiguous association. Quote, "There is a wide agreement that the institution of the Sabbath is an ancient one in Israel, and that the noun Shabbat belongs to the semantic field of shavat, rest, cease. The Old Testament clearly uses Shabbat as a term denoting a day of cessation for religious reasons from the normal daily routine. Shabbat is a day of stopping, a day designed to interrupt the normal activity of work, and a definite and fixed day," unquote. Evaluating how the institution of the Sabbath has been approached in much Protestant Reformed thought, Walter C. Kaiser draws the conclusion, quote, "The command to remember the Sabbath is moral insofar as it requires of a person a due portion of his or her time dedicated to the worship and service of God. But it is ceremonial in that it prescribes the seventh day, unquote. In his Exodus commentary here, noting further passages like Leviticus 23, 7, 15, 35, and 36, he does anticipate a transfer of the Sabbath from the seventh day to a Lord's Day commemoration on the first day. What is important to recognize, though, is how many Christians, albeit with great variance over the centuries, have adhered to what it can at least be regarded as a Sabbath principle, resting on a day dedicated entirely, or at least mainly to God, will not be demeaned by mature Christian people. Exodus 20, 9 to 10a. The fourth commandment directs, 6 days shall you work and accomplish all your work, but on the seventh day is Sabbath to Hashem, your God. Exodus 20, verses 9 to 10a, Art Scroll Tanakh. The first 6 days of the week are intended for work, although two terms appear in the Hebrew source text, ta'avod va'asita kol melakah, which includes the verb avad and the noun melakah. Hence the more common rendering, you shall labor and do all your work. Revised Standard Version, New Revised Standard, English Standard Version, New American Standard, New International Version, New Jewish Publication Society Version, et al. Throughout the Tanakh, melakah, or work, involves an array of applications, including trade mission, business journey, business work, and handiwork craftsmanship, Kaler Baumgartner lexicon. Generally, some kind of skilled labor. Biblically, for certain, what would be considered prohibited work for the Sabbath is described in further Tanakh passages, i.e., Exodus 34:21, 35:3, Numbers 15:32 and 36, Amos 8:5, Jeremiah 17:21 to 22, Nehemiah 13:15 to 21. In the rabbinic tradition, the major examples of prohibited work, Mishnah Shabbat 7:2, would be derived from the sorts of labor employed to build the tabernacle, Exodus 31, 13 to 17, 35:2. But also important, given the Leviticus 18:5 intention of the Torah being a cause of life and not death for keeping its commandments, is how Sarna mentions the widespread Jewish view. Quote, of course, all Sabbath prohibitions are suspended when human life is deemed to be in danger. Pikuach nefesh. In such a situation, it is a religious duty to violate them if that is what is required to save a life. Talmud Yoma 85a and b, unquote. Exodus 20, 10b. A wide variety of examiners recognize how the Sabbath or Shabbat was to be an institution affecting far more than just native ethnic Israelites, but all who compose the community. U beneka, u biteka, avdeka ve behemteka ve gerecha asher be sha'arecha. You, or son of you, or daughter of you, manservant of you, or maidservant of you, or animal of you, or alien of you, who within gates of you. Exodus 20, 10b, from the Kohlenberger Interlinear. Some of the first classifications of those who are to have a Sabbath rest are too easily glossed over. Israelite sons and daughters were not permitted to work. Are we to assume that many, upon hearing that the seventh day was the Sabbath, might have thought of it only being relevant or applicable to male ethnic Israelite fathers, or at least ethnic Israelite parents? But their children were to rest too, as were their servants and their animals and anyone else staying within the community. Within today's Messianic movement, it is the identity of the ger in Exodus 20:10b, which can stimulate a wide degree of debate, as the ger is often believed to represent the place of today's non-Jewish Messianic believers, Ephesians 2:19. Lexically, it is often defined along the lines of sojourner, Brown Driver Briggs, or protected citizen stranger, Kaler Baumgartner, being associated with the verb gur, widely meaning sojourn, Brown Driver Briggs. English translations vary on how to render ger in Exodus 20:10b, including sojourner, Revised Standard Version, English Standard Version, New American Standard, alter, alien, New International Version, stranger, New Jewish Publication Society Version, Jerusalem Bible by Koren, Keter Crown Bible, immigrant, Common English Bible, foreigner, Complete Jewish Bible, or outsider, Tree of Life Version. The ger was an outsider who had entered into the community of Israel, is widely agreed to have acknowledged Israel's God and was usually poor, if not destitute. Tegay in the Jewish Study Bible describes, quote, the resident alien was, at least in some cases, dependent on a specific individual, unquote. From the text of Exodus 20:10b, the ger or sojourner within the community of ancient Israel was expected to observe the weekly Shabbat alongside of the Israelite fathers, mothers, sons, daughters, servants, and animals. Yet, among Jewish examiners, this is not always agreed. A. Cohen argues in the Sonsino Chumash, quote, the stranger is forbidden to do work on the Sabbath for an Israelite, but may do so for himself. Some explain stranger to mean a proselyte who has embraced the religion of Israel. He becomes subject to the laws of Sabbath observance, unquote. The view that the ger of Exodus 20:10b is what would later be the proselyte or convert, Art Scroll Tanakh, of Second Temple Judaism has been debated in biblical studies. The text of Exodus 20:10b prescribed a Sabbath rest for the ger or sojourner in the community of ancient Israel, just as everyone else was to have a Sabbath rest. In later Judaism, some would have a non-Jewish neighbor often conduct some menial work for the Jewish home on the Sabbath. The proverbial Sabbath goy, who would be able to seemingly violate prohibitions like lighting a fire. It cannot go unnoticed how the Qumran community would have opposed such a practice, instead adhering to the restriction one may not send a Gentile to do his business on the Sabbath day. Damascus document 11:1. This is certainly more in keeping with the tenor of the Exodus 20 verses 8 through 11 instruction. Jewish interpreters like Sarna do appreciably ascribe a significance for the Sabbath, not only beyond ethnic Israel, but for what the Sabbath communicates about human equality, dignity, and the protection of the oppressed. Quote, by proscribing work and creativity on that day, and by enjoining the inviolability of nature one day a week, the Torah delimits human autonomy and restores nature to its original state of pristine freedom. Human liberty is immeasurably enhanced, human equality is strengthened, and the cause of social justice is promoted by legislating the inalienable right of every human being, irrespective of social class and of draft animals as well, to 24 hours of complete rest every 7 days. In the ancient world, strangers were often without rights and were without the protection of the law. The Torah is particularly sensitive to their feelings and solicitous of their needs and welfare, unquote. Durham similarly concurs. Quote, the singular pronoun you, ata, is supplemented by a list of 6 potential sources of labor, taking in the family, the employees, the work animals, and even the visitor stopping temporarily with the Israelite. The detailed specification of this expansion is sometimes attributed to humanitarian concern. More likely, it is an attempt to plug obvious loopholes. Not only is the Israelite not to work on the Sabbath, neither is anyone else or even any animal that might conceivably be doing his work for him, unquote. Terence E. Fretheim interweaves a number of key points on the different strata of people expected to have a Sabbath rest. He states, quote, "Every discussion of the Sabbath should be decisively informed by the fact that this day is a divine gift to the world, not a burden," unquote. And then proceeds to quote from his own translation of Yeshua's word of Mark 2:27. "The Sabbath was made for human beings, not human beings for the Sabbath." Fretheim draws the firm conclusion, quote, "The Sabbath is a fundamentally egalitarian institution. The Sabbath rest is for all, rich and poor, master and servant, human beings and animals," unquote. Exodus 20, verse 11. The seventh-day Sabbath or Shabbat is described as something to be associated with God's own cessation from his work in creating the universe. "For in 6 days Adonai made heaven and earth, the sea, and everything in them, but on the seventh day he rested. This is why Adonai blessed the day, Shabbat, and separated it for himself." Exodus 20, verse 11, Complete Jewish Bible. Noting the Sabbath is something blessed by God, Sarna observes how, quote, "It is an integral part of the divinely ordained cosmic order and exists independent of human effort," unquote. With all of the strata of persons for sure enjoined to have a Sabbath rest, Exodus 20, verse 10b, and with the Sabbath connected to the Creator's own cessation from work here in Exodus 20, verse 11, commentators are not at all unjustified to conclude that the Sabbath is an inclusive institution given by God. And not only this, but that the Sabbath communicates something beyond just a seventh day of rest. Fretheim makes the striking observations, quote, "It is not simply something for Israel to keep. Even animals and strangers are to honor it. Yet the divine rest is more than a humanitarian gesture or a paradigm for creaturely resting. Because God did so, the creature should. It is a religious act with cosmic implications. To keep the Sabbath is to participate in God's intention for the rhythm of creation. Not keeping the Sabbath is a violation of the created order. It returns one aspect of that order to chaos. What the creatures do with the Sabbath has cosmic effects. Such lines of thought may help explain the death penalty which Israel attaches to Sabbath keeping. Exodus 31, 12 through 17, 35:2, the order of creation is at stake, unquote. Fretheim basically says that to fail to keep the Sabbath, which for him as a Protestant Christian is probably Sunday, is to initiate a breach in God's creation order. And it is true that in the Torah, Sabbath violation would merit capital punishment. Exodus 31:15, Numbers 15:32-35. Even with the limitation of thinking that the seventh-day Sabbath was later transferred to Sunday, J.A. Meacher does astutely point out, quote, "To what extent the New Testament reaffirms capital punishment is a matter of dispute, as is a question of the death penalty today. But in any case, the Old Testament witnesses to the seriousness with which offenses against the Decalogue were regarded, and, at the very least, the seriousness should be reflected in modern practice," unquote. This writer, that would be me, would affirm that capital punishment for Sabbath breaking was absorbed onto Yeshua the Messiah, sacrificed, Colossians 2:14. But the significance of the seventh-day Sabbath should not be dismissed. given how violation of it once carried the death penalty. This can only highlight the Sabbath's continuity for the people of God. And with the seventh-day Sabbath or Shabbat being associated with God's creation in Exodus 20, verse 11, one cannot overlook some of the factors brought out by R. Alan Cole, at least mentioning how the Sabbath may have had some pre-Mosaic and pre-Israelite origins. Quote, argument has raged as to the origins and date of Sabbath observance. Later Jewish commentators tried hard to find evidence of Sabbath observance in patriarchal days, but apart from the law, the earliest references are 2 Kings 4:23 and Amos 8:5. The passage from Kings suggests worship as well as cessation from work as being an early feature of the day, as it certainly was in post-exilic times. It is highly likely that the origins of Sabbath, like the origins of tithing and circumcision, go back well beyond the law, even though there is no direct biblical evidence for its observance. Unquote. And we'll conclude with Exodus 20, 8 through 11 application. Both Jewish and Christian traditions over the centuries have taken significant guidance from the Fourth Commandment as detailed in Exodus 20, verses 8 through 11, traditions from which today's Messianic people widely benefit. The former has often applied the Sabbath commandment to significant home and synagogue traditions of rest, communal worship, and Torah study. The latter has often applied it to communal worship on the first day of the week and to a time for fellowship among family and fellow believers. Even with some limitations being present among those Christians of the past who believed the Sabbath was changed to Sunday, we should believe that the Lord will still honor them for their wanting to honor him. J.H. Hertz rightly lauds the weekly Shabbat as an institution, which has had a greatly positive impact upon the Jewish people over the centuries. Quote, religious worship and religious instruction, the renewal of man's spiritual life in God, form an essential part of Sabbath observance. We therefore sanctify the Sabbath by a special Sabbath liturgy, by statutory lessons from the Torah and the prophets, and by attention to discourse and instruction by religious teachers. The Sabbath is thus proved the great educator of Israel in the highest education of all, namely the laws governing human conduct. The effect of these Sabbath prayers and synagogue homilies upon the Jewish people has been incalculable. Unquote. From Pentateuch and Haftorahs. Reflecting a view of the Sabbath being transferred to Sunday, but still with a high view of the Sabbath as a Protestant Christian, Meacher directs contemporary believers to make it a time when the normal business of life decisively changes, and this is made a unique day among seven. Quote, if it was to be a holy day of rest, a day of holy rest, it required thoughtful preparation and pre-planning. Because of this, we can summarize by saying that the Sabbath commandment is concerned with how life as a whole is to be ordered under God. It may even be that in the increasing complication of modern life, if the Lord's Day is to be kept special, ever more and more organization of life, business, shopping, homework, whatever, becomes necessary so that this unique day dominates the pattern of ordinary days. In any case, this is one aspect of Sabbath law. It encapsulates our life with God. Unquote. And we will conclude there. And as I said, tomorrow we will be addressing the Fourth Commandment from the book of Deuteronomy. So today we did Exodus, tomorrow we'll do Deuteronomy. And once again, this teaching has been taken from our ministry publication, the Messianic Sabbath Helper. It's a massive resource available in both paperback as well as ebook for Amazon Kindle. And just thinking ahead to next week, because we are going to have an abbreviated week, just Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, because of the Thanksgiving holiday. like many of you, we're going to be having family in town. We're going to be hosting a giant Thanksgiving for family. I'm thinking about addressing the issue of the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. We did reference Mark chapter 2. So that might be a multi-part teaching for Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. You can be penciling that in for your listening to this live stream, this podcast for next week. All right, so that concludes our theology roundup. Now let's move on to some news. We do the news roundup after the theology roundup because, of course, the news is time sensitive and it changes from day to day. We are reminded, number one, to be praying for peace, Israel, Gaza, the Middle East. It most especially affects the Messianic Jewish community in Israel. Number two, be praying for peace, Russia and Ukraine. And number three, be praying for reason and sanity to prevail here on the American home front. And we've got some stories that cover all three of those areas and more. All the links I'm about to go through, these will be available for you to look through later this afternoon when this episode gets archived at messianicapologetics.net. All right, so our first story, this is from November the 18th, from the Jerusalem Post. This was passed along on the IAMCS Rabbis list. It's a very useful read. Don't ask, don't tell Aliyah. All different kinds of Jews are welcome in Israel. Opinion. So this is an opinion article. Will Israel abandon those unable to provide the requisite rabbinical letter? If so, how could Israel claim moral superiority to countries that turned away boatloads of Jews fleeing Nazi Europe? So this was obviously something which was passed along by a number of, and commented on by a number of the IMCS rabbis, talking about mainly, hey, if it's don't ask, don't tell for Aliyah, maybe this is what will be necessary to see Messianic Jews make Aliyah, especially given our increasingly complicated times here in the diaspora. Now, this is a useful read. This is going to be something which a lot of Messianic Jews are going to have to ask. If they live in the diaspora, if they live in countries where there is increasing anti-Semitism, are they going to stay or are they going to be thinking about going to Israel? Now, do I think that every single ethnic Jew is going to be able to make Aliyah to Israel? No, I don't think that's possible. But there are going to be a lot, particularly those who are younger. They're in their 20s, they're in their 30s, they're seeing what's happening here in the U.S., among other places. They might be thinking, hey, I think I need to make Aliyah. We already know, as a result of October the 7th, 2023, of different young Messianic Jewish men who have made Aliyah. Now, there are going to be some who can't because of their age or because they're a quarter Jewish, an eighth Jewish, a 16th Jewish, and by the standards of the state of Israel, they might not have enough Jewish ancestry to make Aliyah. But there are going to be a lot who do, and we need to take note of that as today's Messianic people. All right, our next story, and this involves the American home front. This is from the New York Post. It's one of the first ones which came across my social media feed yesterday, Instagram. The Justice Department will publicly divulge all of its eligible files on late sex offender Jeffrey Epstein within the next 30 days. So effectively between now and the end of the year, U.S. Attorney General Pam Bondi announced, "We will continue to follow the law and encourage maximum transparency." Okay, so obviously there are going to be people who ask the question, okay, what are you trying to hide? What are you trying to do here? But we knew that the Epstein issue, voted on by the House and the Senate, signed into law by the president. Now we're going to see basically what happens between now and the end of the year. Okay, so here is another story. This was actually accidentally skipped over. That's from My Charisma. Yesterday, November the 19th, has the super sign of the end times already been revealed? Charisma always, raises different points about the end times and prophecy. And here, whenever violence breaks out in the Middle East, people instinctively turn back to Scripture. Nations named by the prophets are reemerging, alliances are shifting, and hostility toward Israel is intensifying. For many, the patterns are too precise to ignore. And so you flip through this article, but here, the super sign. This is why it's one of the main reasons the Messianic community is here. The super sign that we are near the last days is the rebirth of the nation of Israel. On May the 14th, 1948, Israel became a nation again after centuries in exile. And of course, for many of us, we believe that that is in fulfillment of Isaiah 66:8. But we are also seeing, whether we like it or not, we're seeing a growing amount of anti-Israel sentiment, even among conservative evangelicals. And many of them in the past 2 years, whether we like it or not, have been barreling toward full-out replacement theology and some very anti-Semitic and anti-Zionist positions. From open source intel, I thought I'd pass this along. This is from yesterday, 2:33 p.m., so after our episode. Researchers have developed a microscopic robot, roughly the size of a grain of sand, that responds to magnetic signals and can carry medication directly to targeted areas inside the body. Okay, so this is a little larger than what many would consider to be nanobots. I know I'm getting a little Star Trek, a little Borgish there. Nanobots are microscopic. That's not as microscopic. When I mean microscopic, I mean something you have to have a microscope, whereas you can see some of that, on the tip of your finger. But yeah, this is something kind of interesting. It definitely shows you how technology is developing. All right, to Russia, Ukraine from Visegrad 24. This is from 12:49 p.m. yesterday, so I would have gotten this after yesterday's broadcast. Financial Times reports that apart from Ukraine having to disband half of its army, get rid of all long-range weapons, and hand over the rest of the areas of the Donetsk region, I mispronounced that, I apologize, currently held by the Ukrainian army, there will be also other demands. One of them is for Ukraine to recognize Russian as an official state language. Another is granting official status to the Russian Orthodox Church. The U.S. and Europe should also legally recognize the Crimea, Donetsk, and Luhansk regions as part of Russia. Okay, so this is not something we haven't heard before in wanting to see the Russia-Ukraine conflict come to an end. Okay, so here is one from End Time Headlines, but many of you all have seen this in various forms before. Fewer high school girls want marriage and children. A new poll finds that fewer high school girls want marriage and children in their future. Okay, now, everything, of course, has to be considered on a case-by-case basis. When you look out at, of course, today's Messianic community or Messianic sphere of influence, the wide numbers of Messianic young men and young women who are unmarried has nothing to do with that. It mainly has to do with us being part of a very small faith community where there are not a lot of choices in order to find a compatible husband or wife. Talk to most Messianic Jewish couples who wanted to find a Jewish husband or a Jewish wife. They often have a very unique story associated with them coming together. So this is something completely different. A lot of it is the consequence of radical feminism. You don't want to be burdened by, motherly responsibilities or duties, having a child, having children. You want to be out, making money, having a career, etc. For certain, there are many married couples, a husband and wife. They're strong man, strong woman, and they're able to adequately juggle responsibilities of both home and the workplace. And what would be a possible poll of what men want? Young men, do they want to be married? Do they want to have a family? Do they want to have children? Or they just want to, go out, make money, and be free agents? So this is concerning, but there are similar polls regarding men as well. But yeah, it does indicate, it's a road sign how marriage is a privilege and a luxury. Now, some difficulties of people not being able to marry are economic. I got too much student loan debt, or I got too many other debts. Others, I take a huge risk in marrying somebody. Are we going to be divorced in 5 years? I mean, these are all the different factors which play in, but this was not something real positive that we see. All right, moving on to our next story. Many of you all know about Bruce Mejia's channel on Instagram. Here he talks about, this is from yesterday, the Zionists can't hide behind Romans 11 anymore, where he does say, he concludes that Israel, the Jewish people, have been permanently thrust away from God, and they're no different than any other people. Now, in this case, if you look at this, I may need to reload it here. Here he goes after our good friend, hello, Mrs. Rachel. And she has a very active social media presence, Instagram, TikTok, Facebook. And I saw this yesterday and sent it on to her, and she wasn't very happy. This is the second time now he's gone after her publicly. So keep hello, Mrs. Rachel, in your prayers. Keep all of us in your prayers who have a social media presence. We're standing with Israel. We're standing with the Jewish people. We get a lot of comments, well, you're just a shill for Israel. You get $7,000 a post. That is total BS. I'd love it if Israel would give me $7,000 a post, but they're not doing that. That's a falsehood, which circulates on social media. But look, it hurts when people go after you. And somebody like him, he's not interested in fair-minded dialogue. He's made up his mind. And somebody like hello, Mrs. Rachel, it's going to hurt her emotionally. It would, just like it would hurt me emotionally. So please do keep that in mind. Keep hello, Mrs. Rachel, in your thoughts and prayers. All right, moving on. This is from Visegrad 24 yesterday at 12:33 p.m. So this would have been right before we got started yesterday. Politico reports that the White House wants the accepted framework to end the Russia-Ukraine war before the end of the month, or potentially even this week. Okay, so today's Thursday, tomorrow is Friday. It's more likely that it's going to be the end of the month, but who knows? Politico writes that it has been told by senior White House officials that they expect a framework for ending the ongoing conflict in Ukraine to be agreed to by all parties by the end of this month, and possibly as soon as this week. So we will see what happens. But we do need to pray for peace, Russia and Ukraine. Everyone can agree on that. Okay, so here's a post which forwarded on from Hananya Naftali. I've seen him in person at a number of MJA IMCS events. Mossad exposed a Hamas terror network in the heart of Europe. A massive Mossad-led operation with help from European intel just took down secret Hamas terror cells hiding in Austria and Germany, stockpiling weapons, planning attacks on Jews and Israelis. Among the arrested, the son of Hamas senior official Bassem Naim, he hid guns and explosives in Vienna. The command came straight from top Hamas leaders in Qatar. Europe is waking up. Hamas isn't just Israel's problem. It's a global threat. So, yeah, everyone is going to, of course, be evaluating for a very long time the conflict, Israel and Gaza. But at the same time, along with that, you get Hamas out of Gaza, you defeated in Gaza, that doesn't mean they're not Hamas people out there in other parts of the world. And that's, of course, very, very concerning. It's very, very disturbing. So this is a good victory for. All right, from Open Source Intel. This is from yesterday evening, 7:39 p.m. U.S. President Donald Trump said in a Truth Social post that he will meet with New York City Mayor-elect Zohran Mamdani on Friday, November the 21st at the Oval Office. Okay, that's bound to be very interesting. Of course, we know this is the kind of thing which can get rescheduled. It can fall through, but we'll be looking to see what happens tomorrow. Okay, also forwarded on from Open Source Intel, meaning that this is the first time I encountered it. Breaking, U.S. President Donald Trump has signed the bill to force the release of the Epstein files. And you can read all of what Trump says here. And of course, the big issue is going to be, we've already noted how Attorney General Bondi has said that it'll happen within the next 30 days or so. Okay, there are going to be a lot of different opinions, but there's going to be tension in Washington, in various political and other high social, economic, entertainment, whatever circles. Is my name in there? Am I going to be embarrassed? That's why we always say pray for reason and sanity to prevail here on the American home front. From the White House, and here you see the same post from Truth Social, but the president specifically, at my direction, the Department of Justice has already turned over close to 50,000 pages of documents to Congress. Do not forget the Biden administration did not turn over a single file or page related to Democrat Epstein, nor did they ever speak about him. So Democrats have used the Epstein issue, which affects them far more than the Republican Party, in order to try and distract from our amazing victories. So here, the president comes from the conclusion that all of this thing about Epstein, it's meant to be a distraction from his plan for America's golden age, basically. Okay. All right, let's go to the final frontier now. From the New York Post yesterday, November the 19th, NASA discovers rock on Mars that shouldn't be there, and scientists think it's a visitor from outer space. Okay, so you see this. Don't think that that is some kind of biological life form. Like an interstellar rolling stone, NASA scientists were baffled after uncovering a rock on Mars that didn't belong there, with a composition pointing to potentially interstellar origins. This rock was identified as a target of interest, the space agency wrote in a recent blog post detailing the potentially intergalactic gravel stone. All right. Certainly here on Earth, we discover meteorites, pieces of asteroids that crash. Some of them leave craters. They are not from Earth natively. Should not be a surprise if you also see pieces of rock, meteorites, different asteroids hit a planet like Mars. But of course, it does beg questions about where does this thing come from? What's its composition? Does it have any biological life on it, even if microscopic? And it can feed into the question of extraterrestrial intelligence. And we got another story. My Charisma picked up on this as well. All right, this came across my feed on Instagram last night, and it's very useful for you to look at. This is from the Israel guys. It's from 3 days ago. The winds of history are changing. Watch this clip from our show with Rabbi Ari Abrahamowitz about why Mamdani getting elected as New York City mayor may be part of biblical prophecy unfolding. So this is a short clip. You can watch it. Right now, a lot of people in the Jewish community, in Israel, here at home in America, other places throughout the world, they're trying to sort through the new New York City mayor-elect, and they're wondering how much longer is it going to be safe for Jews to live in the United States because, and we got some other information after this, but according to Rabbi Abrahamowitz, and he's entitled to his opinion, he thinks that if you are a Jew living in the diaspora, you need to have your bags packed and get ready to go like almost now. Now is the time to come home to the land of Israel. It's no longer, a big giant, mosquito-infested swamp. The desert is blooming. It's a prosperous, modern, beautiful country, and it's where the Jewish people belong. Certainly, this is going to be a question asked in increasing frequency by American Jews now, and it's going to be asked in increasing frequency by today's Messianic Jews. And I have said, and I don't apologize for this, as we get closer to the return of Yeshua, the hub of the Messianic community cannot remain in the North American diaspora. It doesn't mean every single Messianic Jewish person is going to be able to make Aliyah. That's impossible. But the hub of operation cannot stay in the North American diaspora. As many opportunities as the North American diaspora has offered, it's got to shift back toward the land of Israel. All right, so many of you all are probably aware of this by now. And this was the first post I saw on social media last night. It was from 6:42 p.m. from Rabbi Elchanan Pupko, 11th generation rabbi, speaker, and writer, host of the Jewish World podcast. Happening now outside Park East Synagogue. This is in New York City. Anti-Semites have showed up outside Park East Synagogue and are chanting for Intifada. The rabbi of the synagogue is a Holocaust survivor who remembers vividly the horrors of Kristallnacht. Now he gets to see the same human material that shattered the glass of synagogues in Berlin and Vienna in 1938 outside his own synagogue. According to Rabbi Pupko, this is not about Gaza and has never been about Gaza. This is an attack on the Jewish people. And there's a 15-second clip there. So here you have protesters in New York City, which has the largest Jewish population outside of Israel, calling for Intifada. And they're outside a synagogue. And okay, so the next post, and this is some of the commentary from the Misfit Patriot on Instagram, posted 11:08 p.m. last night. He says, if you want to know how the Holocaust happened, it's because not enough people stood up when SHIT like this started in Germany. Wake up and realize what side of history you're on. Your children and grandchildren will know where you stood during this pivotal moment in history, and they're either going to be proud of you or ashamed. And among some of the other commentary that I looked at, and this is why people should be concerned about protesters in front of a synagogue in New York City calling for Intifada. If you have a disagreement with the Israeli government, okay, like any other government, where should you be protesting? You should be protesting in front of their consulate. You should be protesting in front of their embassy, right? Those are the two main places you should be going to. Go to a place where the Israeli government specifically is represented. Why would you go to a religious house of worship and protest? Is this to protest what the government of Israel is doing, or is it to protest Jews? So this is why people are rightfully upset and rightfully disturbed. And we need to point this out. We need to mention this. This is the kind of thing, if you are a Messianic Jewish congregational leader or rabbi, you need to mention this to your people so they can know how to respond, because it'll only be a matter of time before you possibly have protesters in front of your Messianic Jewish congregation or synagogue. Because anti-Semites don't make any differentiation between Orthodox, conservative, Reform synagogue or a Messianic Jewish synagogue. Okay, here's a very useful post. It includes some statements from Benjamin Netanyahu, Prime Minister of Israel, 45 seconds. Passed on by Reverend Jordan Wells. Facts over feelings. Calling Israel's actions in Gaza genocide, according to him, is a straight-up lie. If Israel actually wanted to wipe out Palestinians, Gaza would have been a parking lot on October the 8th. They have the military power to do it in hours. Instead, they drop warnings, call off strikes when civilians are spotted, and allow in thousands of tons of aid, more than any army in history fighting in an urban war zone. This isn't genocide. This is the most restrained counter-terror operation ever conducted against an enemy that hides rockets in hospitals and schools. And this is something which, if you're in Messianic congregational leadership, you need to bring out in front of your congregation periodically, because there are people, non-Jewish people involved in Messianic Judaism, when they don't see the congregational leadership clarify what's happening in the Middle East, they may think, and I know it makes no logical sense any more than if you're going to protest the Israeli government, go to an Israeli government facility. Don't go to a synagogue. But they're going to think, if you don't clarify this, is this assembly complicit in what is happening in the land of Israel? I know it makes no logical sense, but we do not live in logical and reasonable times. Okay, also from the Middle East, shifting over to Iran. This is from this morning at 6:24 a.m., November the 20th. Iranian President Pezeshkian, I know I mispronounced that. Iran no longer has a choice but to relocate its capital, warning that severe water shortages have made Tehran unsustainable. So, the Iranians have a water problem. There's not enough water, so according to this post at least, the capital is going to have to be moved, or government people are going to have to move outside of Tehran. And of course, the observation is, well, if you wouldn't spend all of your limited resources, financial capital, on weapons, and instead in government infrastructure like water, electricity, roads, schools, hospitals, you wouldn't have this problem. And the Israeli government has noted, hey, we've got some of the best desalinization technology on the planet. And if Iran is able to depose this tyrannical theocratic regime, we'd be more than happy as relations are restored to help the Iranians. But again, we live in a world where destruction and mayhem are more commonplace than building and partnership. Okay, here's something I did not want to pass along, but it's also from Reverend Jordan Wells. 1 year ago, Steve Bannon's clear promise. And there's a 56-second clip. This is from last year. Israel is a strategic partner. The biggest ally to Israel are evangelical Christians, MAGA, and traditional Catholics. We will always have your back. Steve Bannon, November 2024. Now, 1 year later, 2025. He's calling Netanyahu a U.S. protectorate, demanding he be removed immediately, declaring the Greater Israel Project finished, insisting Israel is not an ally, and even floating the idea of a Christian kingdom in Gaza. From "we will always have your back" to this in just 12 months. The same movement, evangelicals, patriots, and faith-driven conservatives that poured decades of unwavering support into Israel, is watching its loudest voices do a complete 180. And of course, the question is, what changed? Real awakening or the ultimate flip-flop? Right. Yeah, God is testing a lot of people, even people who once strongly supported Israel. And we don't know why Steve Bannon, among others, have changed their position, but he's not going to be alone. And we need to not ignore this kind of stuff. Okay, and our final story, and this goes back to the discovery on Mars. This is from My Charisma. Historic Mars discovery changes everything. Scientists point to a visitor from outer space. Okay, I think this is kind of a stretch, but it has to do with a foreign rock on the surface of Mars. And here you see, not only does this rock stand out among other features on Mars, but researchers found that the rock contains high levels of both nickel and iron. Okay, these chemical components of the rock could potentially point to it being a meteorite that slammed into the red planet. And then this article kind of concludes with, there's a lot of things about the universe we don't know. Yeah, and they require all of us to be humble. They require all of us to be aware that we don't know everything. And indeed, when the Messiah returns, there will be things revealed to us about the greater universe we're probably not ready for right now. But as I said, we've got meteorites from out there which have crashed here on Earth. Not a huge stretch to think that they're meteorites that crash into Mars. But it gets a lot of people talking. It gets a lot of people speculating. And, this is an area where particularly younger people really do want to know what is going on. All right, so that concludes our news roundup for today. As I said, tomorrow for our theology roundup, we will be going through the Fourth Commandment as witnessed in Deuteronomy. As always, on behalf of Outreach Israel Ministries and Messianic Apologetics, I would like to sincerely thank you for your ongoing prayers, encouragement, and support for all of our ministry efforts. If you have not, please do visit my website, messianicapologetics.net. There you can access a wide array of free articles, frequently asked questions entries. You can check out some back issues of Outreach Israel News, back episodes of Messianic Insider, different McKee moment shorts, and generally take a look at our different adventures over the years. And please do, if you have not already, give a thumbs up to this episode, a heart. It'll help its exposure on social media. We will see you again tomorrow with another episode of Messianic Insider. Until then, may God bless you, shalom, and take care.